The rain hammered against the windshield as I drove through the night, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the back seat, my son Dylan sat silent, his small hand clutching the only possession we had left. Through the static of the radio, a weather report crackled about the storm, but I barely heard it. All I could see was the house ahead, that cursed Victorian mansion in Portland that had been our prison for 3 years, the house where everything had burned, where I had made sure it burned. But let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment I first realized that hell doesn't always come with fire and brimstone. Sometimes it comes dressed in Sunday best, sitting at a dinner table, pretending to be family. It was a Thursday evening, 6 months before the fire. The dining room of the Morrison estate was decorated with crystal chandeliers and antique silverware, everything perfectly arranged by Victoria, my mother-in-law, who believed that presentation was everything. I had spent 2 hours preparing dinner, a pot roast with all the trimmings, hoping that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Dylan, my 8-year-old son, sat beside me in his new shirt, the one I had saved 3 months to buy him. It was pale blue, crisp and clean, and for once he looked like he belonged at that table. Madison, my stepdaughter, had other plans. She was 16, spoiled beyond measure, and she had perfected the art of cruelty with the same dedication her grandmother Victoria applied to polishing silver. I watched as she reached for the pitcher of orange juice, her movements deliberate, calculated. Before I could react, she had tipped it forward, sending a cascade of sticky liquid directly onto Dylan's shirt. The table fell silent. Dylan froze, orange juice dripping from his collar onto his lap. I immediately reached for my napkin, ready to help him, but Madison's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so young. "Let the little rat clean himself up," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Mother says he's nothing but trash anyway. Trash should know how to handle its own messes." I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't the first time Madison had said such things, but hearing her quote Victoria so casually, so publicly, was a new level of degradation. I pulled my hand away and turned to Victoria, hoping for some intervention, some acknowledgement that this was wrong. Instead, Victoria dabbed at her mouth with her napkin, her expression placid. "Madison does have a point, Emma," Victoria said, her voice as cold as the December wind outside. "The boy needs to learn independence. You coddle him far too much." Richard, my husband and Madison's father, sat at the head of the table. I looked at him, silently pleading for support, for him to be the man I thought I had married. He met my gaze, and what I saw there made my stomach turn. His eyes were sharp, cutting, filled with a contempt that matched his mother's. He said nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. I was on my own. Dylan's eyes filled with tears, but he bit his lip, trying to be brave. He was always trying to be brave. At 8 years old, he had already learned that showing weakness in this house was dangerous. I wanted to scoop him up, to take him away from this place, but I had nowhere to go. Richard controlled everything, the money, the house, even the car I drove. Victoria had made sure of that when she convinced Richard to make me sign a prenuptial agreement that left me with nothing if I left. The next morning, I woke to Victoria's voice echoing through the hallway. She was speaking to Madison in that conspiratorial tone they often used, the one that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. I crept to the top of the stairs, listening. "Tomorrow, Dylan will clean all of your shoes," Victoria was saying. "Every single pair. It's time he learned gratitude, time he understood his place in this household." "All of them?" Madison's voice was gleeful. "Even the boots from the garden?" "Especially those," Victoria replied, "the mud-caked ones. It will teach him humility. Lord knows his mother has failed to instill any sense of propriety in the boy." I gripped the banister, my knuckles turning white. They were talking about my son like he was a servant, like he was less than human. I wanted to storm down there, to tell them both exactly what I thought of their twisted lessons, but I knew it would only make things worse for Dylan. Richard would side with his mother and daughter. He always did. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. The following morning, I found Dylan in the mudroom, staring at a pile of Madison's shoes. There must have been 20 pairs, some of them caked with dried mud and grass stains. Madison stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "Get to work, little rat," she said, "and make sure they shine. I want to see my reflection in every single one." Dylan's jaw clenched. I saw the rebellion building in his eyes, the same fire that burned in me. He was my son, after all, and even at 8, he had his limits. "I'm not doing it," Dylan said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm not your servant." The slap echoed through the room before I even saw Madison move. She had struck him across the face, her hand leaving a red mark on his cheek. Dylan stumbled backward, shock and pain written across his features. "You little brat!" Madison screamed. "Who do you think you are? You're nothing, nothing but a burden we have to tolerate because your pathetic mother trapped my father." I moved then, pushing past Madison to get to Dylan, but she wasn't finished. She grabbed one of her mud-caked boots and threw it at him. It hit him square in the chest, leaving a dirty smear on his shirt. That's when Richard appeared. I heard his footsteps thundering down the hallway before I saw him, and when he burst into the mudroom, he had his belt in his hand. The leather was old, worn, the buckle heavy and metallic. I had seen him use it before, on doors, on furniture, when he was angry, but never on Dylan. Until now. You dare defy my daughter? Richard's voice was low, dangerous. You ungrateful little bastard, I'll teach you respect. Everything happened so fast. Richard's hand shot out, grabbing Dylan by the collar. I screamed, throwing myself between them, but Richard was stronger. He shoved me aside, and I crashed into the wall, my head connecting with the hard surface. Stars exploded in my vision, but I could still hear the crack of leather against skin, could hear Dylan's cries. Stop, please stop, I begged, trying to get up, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Victoria appeared in the doorway, and for a moment, I thought she might intervene. Instead, she leaned against the frame, her lips curled into a cold smile. Let him learn his lesson, Richard, she said calmly. The boy needs discipline. Emma has been far too lenient. The beating seemed to last forever, though it was probably only a minute. When Richard finally stopped, Dylan was curled on the floor, sobbing. I crawled to him, gathering him in my arms, but Richard wasn't done. He grabbed Dylan again, dragging him toward the back door. No! I screamed, clinging to Dylan, but Richard kicked me away. The storm will wash the filth off him, Richard snarled, yanking open the door. The rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Maybe it'll wash away his defiance too. He threw Dylan out into the storm like he was nothing more than garbage. My son landed in the mud, his small body immediately soaked by the freezing rain. I tried to go after him, but Richard blocked the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. You step out there, and I'll throw you out too, he said, and you won't be coming back. Behind him, I could hear Madison laughing. She had moved to the upstairs balcony, looking down at Dylan in the yard. Trash belongs with trash, she called out, her voice carried by the wind. Look at you, little rat, finally in your proper place. I stood at the door, watching my son curl into a ball in the mud, the rain pounding down on him. His cries were lost in the storm, but I could see his small shoulders shaking. Victoria pushed past me, heading back to the living room. When you're done with your dramatics, Emma, dinner needs to be prepared, she said over her shoulder. And do try to make it edible this time. That night was the longest of my life. I sat by the window in our bedroom, watching Dylan shiver on the porch where he had crawled for some shelter. Richard had locked the door and taken the key, positioning himself in the hallway to make sure I didn't try anything. Every whimper from Dylan was a knife to my heart. Every gust of wind that battered his small frame felt like it was tearing pieces of my soul away. When the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Richard finally moved from his post. He had fallen asleep in the hallway chair, the key dangling from his fingers. I moved as quietly as I could, slipping the key from his hand and unlocking the back door. Dylan was barely conscious when I found him, his lips blue, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. I carried him inside, wrapped him in every blanket I could find, and held him close. His skin was ice cold, his teeth chattering so hard I feared they might crack. As warmth slowly returned to his body, he opened his eyes and looked at me. Mom, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Why do they hate me so much? That question cut deeper than any of Richard's blows ever could. How could I explain to my 8-year-old son that some people are simply cruel? That some people find pleasure in the suffering of others? That his only crime was being born to a mother they deemed unworthy? I don't know, baby, I whispered back, holding him tighter. But I promise you, this won't last forever. It was a promise I intended to keep, though I didn't yet know how. The morning after Dylan's night in the storm, Madison made sure to remind us of our place. She waited until I was serving breakfast, then casually picked up a wet cleaning rag from the bucket by the pantry and tossed it at Dylan's feet. Clean the floor, dog, she said, not even looking up from her phone. And when you're done, you can thank me for giving you purpose. Without me, you'd be completely useless. Dylan looked at the rag, then at me. I could see the question in his eyes. Should he do it? Would it be easier to just comply? But I also saw something else, something that hadn't been there before. A hardness, a wall going up behind his eyes. Richard lowered his newspaper, watching the scene with interest. When Dylan didn't immediately pick up the rag, Richard's expression darkened. Don't make me repeat my daughter's instructions, he said, his voice carrying that edge that preceded violence. Pick up the rag, boy. Dylan bent down and picked it up, but he didn't start cleaning. He just held it, staring at it like it was a foreign object. Madison laughed, that cruel, tinkling sound that had become the soundtrack to our suffering. Look at him, Dad. He's as dumb as he is useless. I was about to intervene when Richard stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with an ominous sound, but instead of going to Dylan, he turned to me. This is your fault, Emma, he said. You've raised him to be weak, pathetic, just like you. He stepped closer, his breath hot on my face. Do you want him to grow up to be a failure? A burden on society? Or do you want him to learn his place? To understand that some people are meant to serve while others are meant to lead? He's a child, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He's just a child. He's a mistake. Victoria's voice cut through the room as she entered from the parlor. She had been listening, of course. She always was. He's your mistake, Emma. A reminder of your poor choices, your low breeding. The boy is a carbon copy of you, weak, useless, and constantly in the way. She walked over to where Dylan stood, still clutching the rag. With one perfectly manicured finger, she tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her eyes. You will never be one of us, she told him, her voice soft but venomous. You will never be good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be. Now clean the floor like the servant you are. After that breakfast, things began to change in me, not outwardly. I was careful to maintain the same subservient demeanor, the same downtrodden expression they expected. But inside, something was shifting, hardening. I started to pay attention to things I had previously ignored. I noticed Richard's obsession with his tool collection in the garage. He had inherited it from his father, and he treated those rusty saws, hammers, and drills like they were sacred relics. Every Sunday, he would spend hours in the garage, polishing them, organizing them, telling anyone who would listen about the history of each piece. These tools built the Morrison legacy, he would say. They represent hard work, real masculine achievement, not like the soft, useless generation being raised today. I noticed Victoria's fixation on her china cabinet, particularly the silver tea service that had belonged to her grandmother. She polished those pieces herself, never trusting the task to anyone else, not even the housekeeper. The silver represented old money, class, breeding, everything she believed made her superior to people like me. I had once heard her tell a friend that the tea service was worth more than some people's entire existence, and she had glanced at me when she said it. And I noticed Madison's growing collection of designer handbags and jewelry, all purchased with the money Richard gave her, money that should have been going toward Dylan's education or his future. She would flaunt each new purchase, making sure I saw her parade around with bags that cost more than I used to make in 6 months at my old job. This is what success looks like, Emma, she had once told me, holding up a particularly gaudy designer purse. You'll never know what it feels like to own something this valuable. Even if you sold yourself, you couldn't afford it. Each observation was filed away, stored in a growing arsenal of knowledge. I was learning their weak points, their attachments, the things they valued more than human decency. And late at night, when Dylan and I would huddle together in our room, the only space in the house where we felt remotely safe, I would whisper to him, "They think they own us," I told him one night, stroking his hair as he lay with his head in my lap. "They think they control everything about our lives. But people like them, they always have weaknesses. They care more about things than people, and that's their fatal flaw." "What are you going to do, Mom?" Dylan asked, looking up at me with those big, trusting eyes. I pressed a finger to my lips. "Not yet," I said. "But soon. I promise you. Soon." The cruelty continued, each day bringing fresh humiliations. Richard seemed to take particular pleasure in forcing Dylan into degrading positions. One afternoon, he made Dylan kneel on the hard kitchen floor for 3 hours because the boy had failed to address Madison as Miss Madison when she demanded he fetch her phone charger. "You'll stay there until you understand respect," Richard had said, standing over Dylan like a warden. "And if your knees hurt, good. Pain teaches lessons that words cannot." I had to continue cooking dinner while my son knelt there, tears streaming silently down his face. Victoria sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and occasionally glancing at Dylan with satisfaction. "This is good for him, Emma," she said, as if she were discussing the weather. "Children today are too soft. In my day, we knew our place. We knew that respect and hierarchy were the foundations of a well-ordered society." Madison would drift in and out, each time finding some new way to torment Dylan. She brought her muddiest riding boots and dropped them in front of him. "When you're done being punished, these need cleaning," she said. "And Emma, that casserole you made last night? I fed it to the dogs. It was only fit for animals anyway." But perhaps the worst part was dinner times. Victoria had instituted a new rule where Dylan and I would eat only after the family had finished, and only the leftovers. If there were no leftovers, we would go without. It was her way of reminding us that we were charity cases, dependent on their mercy. One evening, after they had finished a particularly lavish meal of roasted duck and expensive wine, Madison scraped her plate directly into the garbage disposal, making sure we saw. "Oops," she said with a giggle. "Guess you two are going hungry tonight. Oh well, Emma could probably stand to lose a few pounds anyway. You've really let yourself go since you trapped my father." I said nothing, just guided Dylan to our room. I had started keeping crackers and granola bars hidden in there, stolen from the pantry during my rare moments alone. We would make do, as we always did. But I was also busy during those moments alone. I was testing locks, checking window latches, noting where keys were kept. I discovered that the lock on Richard's garage was loose, had been for months, but he was too proud to fix it himself and too cheap to call a locksmith. I found where Victoria kept the key to her precious china cabinet, hidden in a false book on the library shelf. And I noticed that Madison left her designer bags scattered around the house with careless abandon, so confident in her invulnerability that she never considered someone might target her prized possessions. Late one night, about 3 weeks before the fire, I sat by the window, watching another storm roll in. The weather in Portland had been particularly volatile that winter, storm after storm battering the coast. Dylan was asleep, his small body finally relaxed after another day of torment. I watched the lightning flash across the sky and made my decision. They wanted to teach lessons? Fine. But they were about to learn that every teacher eventually meets a better educator. Every bully eventually encounters someone who refuses to be bullied anymore, and every person who plays with fire eventually gets burned. The plan formed slowly, carefully, over those next weeks. I needed everything to be perfect. I needed them to suffer the way Dylan and I had suffered, to lose the things they valued most, to feel the same helplessness we had felt. But more than that, I needed them to understand why it was happening, to know that their cruelty had consequences. I started small, doing reconnaissance. I noted Richard's schedule, when he spent time in the garage, when Victoria polished her silver, when Madison was out shopping or with friends. I memorized the layout of the house, every exit, every window, every place where something valuable was kept. And I waited for the perfect storm. It came on a Friday night in March. The Weather Service had been warning about it all week, a massive system moving in from the Pacific, promising heavy rain, high winds, and possible flooding. Perfect. Richard loved storms, loved standing at the window watching nature's fury, probably because it reminded him of his own capacity for violence. Victoria hated them, would retreat to her room with her silver, polishing by candlelight because she claimed the electric lights were too harsh. And Madison would be home, probably streaming shows on her phone, surrounded by her material treasures. That afternoon, I cooked an elaborate dinner, my best effort in months. I wanted them satisfied, comfortable, their guards down. I watched as they ate, praising the food for once, Richard going so far as to have seconds. After dinner, they dispersed to their usual evening activities. Richard to the living room with his tools, polishing his father's old hammer. Victoria to her room with her silver service. Madison to the den, bags and jewelry scattered around her like a dragon's hoard. I waited until the storm truly hit, until the rain was pounding so hard against the windows that it sounded like gravel. I waited until the wind was howling through the eaves, until the power flickered once, twice, a warning of what was to come. And then I moved. First, I went to Dylan. He was awake, but had been waiting as I told him to. "It's time," I whispered. "Go to the car, hide in the back seat. Don't come out until I get you, no matter what you hear." He looked scared, but nodded. My brave boy. He slipped out through the kitchen door while the family was distracted by the storm. I watched him disappear into the darkness, heading for the car parked at the far end of the property, and then I began. The garage was first. I had already loosened the lock further over the past days, and now it took only a firm pull to break it completely. Inside, Richard's precious tool collection hung on the walls and lay scattered across the workbench. Every piece had a story. He had told me countless times. His father's saw, his grandfather's level, tools that had built the Morrison fortune, that represented masculinity and legacy and all the things he claimed I could never understand. I gathered them all. The hammers, the saws, the drills, the wrenches. I carried them out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. I piled them in the center of the driveway, piece by piece, creating a monument to Richard's pride. When every tool was accounted for, I went back to the garage and found the gasoline Richard kept for the lawnmower. I doused the pile thoroughly, the gas mixing with rainwater, creating a toxic puddle. I pulled out the matches I had stolen from the kitchen drawer, waterproofed in a plastic bag. It took 3 tries in the wind, but finally, one lit. I tossed it onto the pile. The gasoline ignited with a whoosh that momentarily drowned out the storm. Flames leaped into the air, orange and furious, fed by the wind. The old wood handles of the tools caught quickly, the metal beginning to heat and warp. I could smell burning varnish, old oil, the destruction of legacy turning to toxic smoke. I heard Richard's roar before I saw him. He came barreling out of the house, his face a mask of horror and rage. "No, no, what have you done?" He ran toward the flames, trying to beat them down with his bare hands, trying to save something, anything, from his father's collection. But the fire was too hot, too intense. It drove him back, singeing his hair, blistering his hands. He screamed at me. "Put it out! Emma, put it out now!" I stood in the rain, watching him dance around the flames like a man possessed. "This is your legacy, Richard," I said, my voice calm despite the chaos. "This is everything you valued. Your father's tools, your masculine pride, all of it, turning to ash. While Richard was occupied with the fire, I ran back into the house. Victoria had emerged from her room, standing at the top of the stairs, her silver tea service clutched to her chest. She saw me coming and her eyes widened. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare touch my things." But I was already moving. I bounded up the stairs, and before Victoria could react, I grabbed the silver tea service from her arms. She shrieked, clawing at me, but I pushed past her. She stumbled, catching herself on the banister, screaming obscenities as I ran back down the stairs. "That's been in my family for 4 generations," she wailed. "It's worth more than you'll ever be." "Is it?" I called back. "Let's find out." I ran back outside, where Richard was still trying desperately to save his tools. I held up the silver service, making sure Victoria, who had followed me to the door, could see. Her face went white. "No, please," she begged, a word I had never heard from her before. "Please, Emma. Not the silver. Anything but the silver." I looked at her, this woman who had tormented my son, who had called him trash, who had polished her precious metal while my child went hungry. "You said this was worth more than some people's entire existence," I reminded her. "Let's see if it can survive what your cruelty couldn't destroy." I threw each piece into the flames. The teapot first, then the sugar bowl, the creamer, the tray. Victoria's screams joined Richard's roars as the silver began to melt and warp in the intense heat. The delicate engravings bubbled and disappeared. The gleaming surface turned black and then started to run, liquid metal mixing with rainwater. 4 generations, I said, watching the destruction. Gone in 4 minutes. That's about how long it took you to destroy my son's spirit the first time you called him worthless. Victoria collapsed on the porch, sobbing, reaching toward the fire as if she could somehow pull her precious silver back from the flames. But there was no saving it. The flames had consumed it all, turning legacy into slag. Now for Madison. I went back inside, found her in the den, staring at her phone in confusion. She looked up as I entered, her face twisted in annoyance. "What is all the screaming about?" she demanded. "And where are my bags? I had 3 Birkins on this couch and now they're gone." I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. "Check your bank account, Madison." She looked at me like I was insane, but she opened her banking app. I watched as the color drained from her face. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the transactions, each one showing a transfer out, money moving to accounts she didn't recognize, couldn't access, would never find. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice small for the first time since I had known her. "That's my money." "My money?" "Actually," I corrected, "it was your father's money. Money he should have been spending on his son's education, his future, his well-being. Money he gave to you instead, to fund your cruelty, to buy you weapons to hurt us with. Those bags, those jewels, all of it purchased with money that should have gone to Dylan." "Where is it?" she screamed, lunging at me. "Where's my money? Where are my things?" I stepped aside, letting her momentum carry her past me. "Your bags are burning outside with your grandfather's tools and your grandmother's silver. Your money is somewhere you'll never find it, distributed to charities that actually help children instead of torturing them. And you," I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not a powerful tormentor but a spoiled child who had never been told no. "You're left with nothing but the memory of what you lost." Madison ran to the window, saw the flames still dancing in the driveway, saw her precious designer bags curling and blackening in the heat. She let out a sound that was half scream, half sob, pressing her hands against the glass. "You can't do this," she cried. "Those were mine. They were mine. And my son was mine," I said quietly. "But you treated him like he was yours to torment. You threw mud-covered boots at him. You called him trash. You laughed when your father beat him and when your grandmother starved him. Every bag burning out there represents a moment of his suffering that you enjoyed. Every dollar that disappeared is a tear," he cried, "because of your cruelty." I left her there, sobbing against the window, and walked back outside. The 3 of them were there in the driveway now, standing in the rain, illuminated by the flames. Richard, his hands blistered and burnt, staring at the molten remains of his tools. Victoria, collapsed in the mud, reaching toward the unrecognizable slag that had been her silver. Madison, wet and shivering, her phone clutched uselessly in her hand, her bank account as empty as her soul had always been. They looked at me as I approached, 3 people who had wielded power over me for so long, now reduced to helpless witnesses of their own destruction. The rain poured down, the fire burned despite it, and I stood before them feeling powerful for the first time in 3 years. "You wanted to teach my son a lesson," I said, my voice carrying over the storm. "You wanted to show him his place, to make him understand that he was less than you, that we were both less than you. You took everything from us, our dignity, our peace, our safety, our hope. You made us feel like we were nothing." I gestured to the fire, to the destruction around us. "But you forgot something important." You forgot that everything you valued, all these things you used to prove your superiority, they were just things. Metal and fabric and money, they can burn. They can be taken away. They can disappear. Victoria looked up at me, mascara running down her face, her perfect composure completely shattered. You've destroyed us, she whispered. No, I corrected. I've destroyed your things. The way you destroyed my son's childhood. The way you destroyed any chance of this being a real family. You did this to yourselves. Every cruel word, every violent act, every moment of torment you inflicted, it built toward this. You created this fire. I just lit the match. Richard tried to lunge at me then, but his burnt hands made him clumsy. He slipped in the mud and fell, landing hard. Victoria tried to help him up, but she was too weak, too destroyed by the loss of her precious silver. They fumbled in the mud like the pathetic creatures they truly were. Madison just stared at me, something like understanding finally dawning in her eyes. You did all this, she said slowly. Because we hurt Dylan? I did all this, I replied, because you forgot that people matter more than possessions, because you valued metal over flesh, money over humanity, pride over love. I did this because someone had to show you that actions have consequences, that cruelty isn't free, that you can't torture people without eventually paying a price. The fire was beginning to die now, the rain finally overwhelming it, leaving nothing but twisted metal and ash. I looked at the three of them, broken and muddy and stripped of everything they had used to prop up their false superiority. You haven't just lost your tools and your silver and your money, I told them. You've lost us. You've lost me. And you've lost Dylan. You've lost the only chance you ever had to have a real family, one built on love instead of cruelty. And that is the real revenge, not the fire, not the destruction. But knowing that you threw away something precious, something that could have brought you actual joy, in favor of things that turned to ash the moment they were tested. I turned and walked toward the car where Dylan waited. Behind me, I could hear them calling out, Victoria begging me to stay, to fix this, to make everything right again. Richard yelling threats that rang hollow in the storm, Madison crying that she would change, that things would be different. But I didn't look back. I got to the car, opened the back door, and found Dylan sitting there, dry and safe, his eyes wide as he looked past me at the burning house. Is it over, Mom? He asked. Yes, baby, I said, getting into the driver's seat. It's over. We're free. As I drove away, I could see them in the rearview mirror, three figures standing in the rain and the dying firelight, surrounded by the ashes of everything they had valued. They were screaming, gesticulating, probably still not understanding what had truly been lost. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to replace those things, the tools, the silver, the money. But they would never replace us. They would never get back what they had so carelessly thrown away. The rain continued to fall as we drove through Portland's empty streets. Dylan climbed into the front seat and curled up beside me, his small hand gripping mine. Where are we going? He asked. Somewhere new. I told him. Somewhere they'll never find us. Somewhere you'll never have to clean anyone's shoes or kneel on a hard floor or sleep in the rain. Somewhere you can just be a kid. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Were you scared when you did it? I thought about that. Had I been scared? In the moment, no. I had been focused, determined, driven by a mother's love and a survivor's rage. But now, driving away with my son, watching the city lights blur in the rain, I felt something else. Not fear, not regret, but a kind of peace I hadn't known in 3 years. No. I answered honestly. I wasn't scared. I was finally doing what I should have done the moment they first hurt you. I was protecting you, protecting us. Several months have passed since that night. We're living in Seattle now, far enough from Portland that the Morrisons haven't found us, though I doubt they're looking very hard. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they're still there, in that house, trying to rebuild their collections, their pride, their sense of superiority. Victoria apparently found a new silver tea service at an estate sale, though everyone says it's not the same. Richard replaced some of his tools, but they're modern ones, without the history, without the legacy. And Madison got a job, her first real job, to try to rebuild her savings. The irony isn't lost on me. Dylan is thriving. He's in a new school, making friends, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. He's in therapy, working through the trauma of those 3 years, but he's getting better every day. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with a question in his eyes, and I know he's wondering if what I did was right, if destroying everything they valued was justified. I don't have a perfect answer for that. Revenge is a complicated thing. It doesn't erase the past, doesn't undo the damage, doesn't make everything suddenly okay. But sometimes, it's necessary. Sometimes, the only way to stop a cycle of cruelty is to burn it down completely, to destroy the tools of torture so they can never be used again. What I did that night wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. It was about showing my son that he didn't have to accept cruelty, that he was worth fighting for, that sometimes you have to destroy the old to build something new. And in destroying their precious possessions, I destroyed their power over us. I took away the things they used to elevate themselves and revealed them for what they truly were: small, cruel people whose worth was entirely dependent on external validation. The scars remain. Dylan still has nightmares sometimes, still flinches when he hears raised voices. I carry guilt for not leaving sooner, for subjecting him to those years of torment. But we're healing. Every day without cruelty is a day of recovery. Every laugh, every moment of peace, every night where Dylan sleeps soundly in his bed is a victory. I think about them sometimes, the Morrison family, standing in the rain watching everything burn. I think about Victoria reaching for her melted silver, Richard staring at the twisted remains of his tools, Madison clutching her empty bank account. And I feel something I didn't expect: pity. Because in the end, they lost more than possessions. They lost the chance to be better people. They lost the opportunity to build real relationships based on love and respect. They lost a grandson who could have adored them, a daughter-in-law who could have been an ally, a chance at a family that was whole and healthy. They chose things over people, pride over love, cruelty over compassion. And when the fire came, all those choices turned to ash, just like the tools and the silver and everything else they had valued. I chose differently. I chose my son. I chose our future over their past. I chose love over cruelty, freedom over bondage, hope over despair. And yes, I chose fire over silence, destruction over acceptance, revenge over passivity. The rain that night washed away more than just the ashes. It washed away the last remnants of the woman I had been, the one who accepted cruelty because she thought she had no choice. It revealed the woman I had become, the one who would burn down the world to protect her child. They taught me many lessons during those 3 years. They taught me about cruelty, about how far people will go to maintain their sense of superiority. They taught me about my own strength, my capacity to endure. And finally, they taught me about justice, about the moment when endurance must give way to action. But the most important lesson wasn't one they intended to teach. It was this: that every oppressor's power is an illusion, maintained only by the victim's compliance. The moment you refuse to comply, the moment you stand up and fight back, that power disappears like smoke. Or in their case, like metal melting in fire, like silver turning to slag, like money evaporating into thin air. As I write this, sitting in our small apartment in Seattle, I can hear Dylan laughing in the next room. He's on the phone with a friend from school, making plans for the weekend. Normal, healthy, happy plans. The sound of his joy is worth more than all the silver tea services in the world, more valuable than any tool collection, more precious than any amount of money. That's what the Morrisons never understood. They spent their lives accumulating things, using those things to hurt others, to prove their worth, to maintain their superiority. But in the end, those things meant nothing. They couldn't keep them warm on a cold night. They couldn't make them laugh. They couldn't love them back. I have nothing compared to what they had. This apartment is small. My job pays barely enough to cover our expenses. We eat simple meals, wear thrift store clothes, live modestly. But I have Dylan's laughter. I have his trust. I have mornings where we make pancakes together and evenings where we read books side by side. I have a relationship built on love, not fear. And they have ashes. They have melted silver and twisted metal and empty bank accounts. They have the memory of things they once possessed, things they once used to hurt us, things that are now gone forever. They have regret, though I doubt they understand what they should truly regret. They probably regret the loss of their possessions more than the loss of their family. Sometimes I wonder if they think about us. If Richard looks at his new, soulless tools and remembers his son, if Victoria polishes her replacement silver and remembers her grandson, if Madison buys a new bag with her hard-earned money and thinks about the boy she tormented, I wonder if they've learned anything, if they've changed, if they understand why it all had to burn. But mostly, I don't think about them at all, because that's the final revenge, isn't it? They spent years making sure we thought about them constantly, feared them, worried about their moods, their demands, their cruelty. Now, we're free to forget them. They're just a bad memory, growing fainter every day, like smoke dissipating in the wind. The fire that night did more than destroy their possessions. It cleansed us. It burned away the chains they had wrapped around our lives. It illuminated the truth they had tried so hard to hide: that we mattered, that we deserved better, that we had the power to take our lives back. I don't regret what I did. I don't regret the fire, the destruction, the revenge, because it wasn't really about hurting them. It was about freeing us. And in that rain-soaked driveway, surrounded by flames and ashes, we were finally, completely free. Dylan comes into the room now, asking what I'm writing. I tell him it's a story, one he'll understand better when he's older. He shrugs, gives me a hug, and goes back to his room. Such a simple gesture, a hug from my son, but it means everything. It's something I couldn't have done in that house, not without risking punishment, not without Victoria's sneers or Madison's mockery or Richard's violence. That's what they lost. Not just tools and silver and money, They lost this. They lost simple, pure, uncomplicated love. They lost morning hugs and shared laughter and the possibility of real family. They traded it all for power and possessions and pride. And when the fire came, when everything they valued turned to ash, they finally learned what we had known all along, that love is the only thing that truly matters. The only thing that can't be destroyed by flames. The only thing worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth choosing above all else. I chose love. They chose things. And in the end, love survived the fire, while their things became nothing but ashes in the rain.